So, welcome. Welcome in the NOI Techpark. Welcome everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces here, many people attending. That's great. And also we have camera recording, so there are people also joining us online. It's a pleasure for us, NOI Techpark, together with Eurac Research, to introduce a new format, I would say. So NOI Tech Talks, it's an idea born in the team of Harald Pechlaner at Eurac Research to create a format to discuss technology topics, but not only from a view of technology, also of society. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome you here and to open the first edition, and that the first edition is dedicated to digital technologies. I am Patrick Honewein and responsible for tech transfer digital here in NOI Techpark. So the goal we have is to have you discuss about how digital technologies can improve the world, can bring innovation to nature, to humans, to business processes. And our specialization strategy we developed together with the research organizations at the park, so together with Eurac Research, with the Free University of Bolzano, Fraunhofer Italia, and the Research Center Limburg, and also together with the startups and the companies here in NOI Techpark. The specialization strategy digital defines 3 areas of specialization. And the first area is Internet of Things, which maybe is important today because Internet of Things means we distribute sensors in nature, in production lines of company, but also on human beings. If we talk about smart health, for example, to collect data, to understand how nature is feeling, how a company is working, and so on. The second area is then the storage and the sharing of this data among different systems. We provide as NOI Techpark the Open Data Hub, opendatahub.com, which is a free platform where companies and organizations can share their data, real data, with research groups, but also with other companies to produce innovation, data-driven applications. And the third area, I think, is fundamental. Once you have the data, you can create value out of data, you can implement algorithms and business models, and we called this third area artificial intelligence. And I would like to say that we defined this before November 22. I assume you know in November 22, ChatGPT was released into the public, so we already knew, no, we didn't, but artificial intelligence and algorithms, they are not important since ChatGPT. They have been important before as well. And I think it's crucial that we don't look at AI only from a technological or innovation point of view, but also consider the implications for our society. And if you have seen in front of the Faculty of Engineering, we have an artwork. It's called The Golden Mean. This golden artwork you see there. And it's kind of a message that innovation and research should be in balance with societal needs. So humans should be considered first than technological innovation. And there has to be a balance among these two. And I think this is perfect topic today. So trust in AI, do we trust the AI, do we trust the data, is a perfect topic for what we are doing in NOI Techpark, so pushing the boundaries of innovation and research and innovation with AI, but also considering the nature of innovation and our nature itself. And therefore, I'm really happy that the first edition will be about AI and digital, and I hand over to Harald Pechlaner, who is the creator of this format, and I thank him very much. I thank you to participate, so huge number of people here, and I wish you good discussions. Thank you very much.
Not the inventor, but one partner together with NOI Techpark. Thank you very much, Patrick. Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to Trust in AI, Opening the Black Box. This event was developed together, in fact. This is a strong cooperation between NOI Techpark and Eurac, especially the Center for Advanced Studies. Center for Advanced Studies is an explicitly interdisciplinary unit within Eurac research. And what we do is try to contribute from the research side in this shared experiment, I would even say experience. Especially the human-machine society technology interfaces are coming up more and more. And is there any human side of the technological developments on one hand, and on the other hand, especially with AI, many questions around societal challenges. At the Center for Advanced Studies, in fact, we focus on a key question: how does technology change our society, and how does society in turn shape technology? Very easy questions, but a lot of more specific questions behind. So in our research, again, we think that technology should not develop behind society's back. It should develop with society and for society. And that's exactly why today's event is so important. We want to open up the so-called black box of artificial intelligence and talk about something fundamental: trust. With all this crisis and big changes on a worldwide scale, in a way, we lost trust, looking in a more micro perspective on societies. And now the technological developments with special focus to AI are coming up. Can we trust AI? Should we? And what conditions need to be in place for trust to be possible or justified? And before we get started, I'd like also to say thank you very much. And I will try to keep it brief. Thank you again, Patrick, to you, your staff, and the team of NOI Techpark. There are many people around, I have to say. Thank you very much to Birgit Meyer and Lisa Geier. Behind the scene, Uli Stofner, CEO of NOI Techpark, and behind the scene, Stefan Ordner, CEO of Eurac. Both of them were really happy once we started this initiative, and so they supported it in a very strong way. I have to say thank you very much to Roland Benedikter. He's a co-chair of the Center for Advanced Studies. He's an expert in future studies and anticipation. We early started to discuss this human, machine, and society technology interfaces. And today we are here. And after two experiments with the so-called Futurological Congress a couple of years ago now, together with the NOI Techpark here. I have to say thank you very much, especially to Viringa. Sinta is a researcher and artist at the Ars Electronica Future Lab in Linz, Austria. She has moderated many events and panels at the Ars Electronica Festival and elsewhere, always drawing on her background in science and technology studies. We are thrilled to have her with us today. Thank you and enjoy the event.
Thank you very much. So I am now the third person who can welcome all of you here to the NOI Techpark and to this new event series that we're doing. So great to see that so many of you have showed up, and also thank you to all of the people that are joining us online. So like we said before, this event is now the first one in a new series where we want to go into the topics of technology and society, and especially this complex relationship that these two have with each other. Because we want everyone to understand that technology does not develop in isolation. The direction in which technology is developed is always determined by its social, by its political and by its cultural context. And at the same time, the way that technology is functioning is constantly influencing how we live, how we communicate with each other, how we make decisions. So that's why with these series, we want to get into how do these two interact with each other. So what we're doing is every time we have one of these talks, we choose a specific topic, and then we invite international experts and also experts here from Bolzano and the NOI Techpark to discuss this certain topic, unpack it, what are the important questions, what are the important themes, and try to shed some light on this topic. We also want all of you to be part of the discussion, so we are using a certain application for this called Mentimeter. So I think you see here a QR code. I think later on the QR code will also be larger. So if you have a question, you can scan it and just write it there, and I will see it here on the screen, and then later on, when we start with the general discussion, I can pick up these questions as we get to that point in the discussion, basically. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the first topic for this first talk, which is extremely important in this age of rising artificial intelligence, namely trust. Because we're using AI systems more and more in everyday life. It's already being applied in areas such as healthcare, such as education, such as criminal justice or transportation, because AI systems are already able to diagnose diseases or personalize education or drive self-driving vehicles, of course. So, AI systems, so therefore, it is important to realize more and more how and when we can trust these AI systems. But when we talk about these AI systems, there's always what we hear is that they are described as black boxes. So why are we using this term, and why are AI systems black boxes? This is basically because the decision-making processes of AI systems are often complex, they are opaque, they are hard to interpret. So this leads to very important ethical and social questions. So, and also when it comes to accountability, we have to ask who is responsible for this decision-making process if we don't really understand how it works. So today we have two experts with us, and we're very happy that they are here. And these experts will first, I will introduce them to you, and they will each give an introduction into the topics that they are researching. They'll give some input on their side because they are both researching this topic, but from slightly different but still compatible angles. And after that, we will engage in general discussion, and also there you are all invited to ask your questions through this application. So I will first introduce the speaker. So the first person is Chiara Ghedini. She is a professor at the Free University of Bolzano here. And she's also the vice president of the Italian Association for Artificial Intelligence. She specializes in designing and applying frameworks that combine knowledge representation and reasoning with machine learning techniques. So these are tools that help make sense of how AI systems process, structure, and share knowledge. Her work is particularly relevant in areas such as business process modeling, and this is where AI is increasingly used to support and automate complex decision-making processes. So a warm welcome for Chiara. Great. And then our second speaker, which is also the person who will present for us first, is Brent Mittelstadt. He is a professor of data ethics and policy at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford. He is a philosopher of technology, and he's one of the leading voices in the field of AI ethics. His work critically examines algorithmic decision-making processes, fairness, transparency, and accountability, and his work therefore plays a key role in shaping how we think about AI governance and regulation. What makes his research also so possible is, like the research that is done here, it is very multidisciplinary, so it brings together philosophy, law, computer science, policy, and it is all to better understand how AI impacts us in society. So I'll give the word to you once you arrive on stage.
Thank you so much for the introductions, and thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for coming to discuss this really important topic. Thank you everybody for joining us online as well. Very, very happy to be able to introduce some of my work to you and just tell you a bit more about how I think about this question of trust in AI. There's a number of phrases that are really important in the title of this event. This idea of opening the black box usually refers to the idea that we're talking about systems that are fundamentally inscrutable in some way. They're inscrutable because of the amount of data they're processing, the number of things that they take into account when they are producing an output from an input, say making a decision about a person. And they may simply not be understandable to us as people. They may just deal with too many things simultaneously to be understood. But at the same time, if we're meant to trust them in our day-to-day lives, there has to be some way to bridge that gap. We have to be able to do something to be able to understand them in some way. So I'm going to introduce two sorts of AI to you and talk about different explainability challenges with them and hopefully lead to some discussion of solutions at the end. The first, though, would be what is called predictive AI. We can also call this traditional AI, pre-ChatGPT AI, the sorts of stuff that we would normally just call machine learning, but took on a new life as AI. This is a really, really simple classic example of it. This is AI that is used to classify objects in pictures. So basically, we want to be able to classify whether a picture has a cat or a dog in it. The way we do that is we give a system, a neural network, a bunch of labeled pictures of cats and dogs. The system learns from them, and then we give it an example that it hasn't seen yet, and it's able to predict whether there's a cat or a dog, or classify whether there's a cat or a dog in the picture. Now, if we want to explain how that is actually working, one of the ways we might do it is with what's called a saliency map, or you can think of it as a heat map. Essentially, what this is showing you is the areas of the images that the classifier thought was most important when it was making that decision about whether there was a cat or a dog, or at least which bits of the picture were a cat, which bits of the picture were a dog. There's lots of different methods for this, but that's one basic way that we can try to explain how these classifiers work. Another sort of task that we might have for this classic AI, as we would call it, would be prediction tasks. This is an example of a system that is used to assess the creditworthiness, or basically how risky of a borrower a person might be if they were to go for a loan. You feed a bunch of user data into this credit scoring system. It may take some of these things like credit history, income, credit use into account, and then it'll produce some sort of evaluation, be it a score, be it high, medium, low risk. There's lots of different ways to do it. And so if we wanted to explain that, we might do something like feature importance. Basically what this is telling you, again, lots of different methods to do it. It's just telling you which features, which characteristics of the person were most important for determining their risk score, their creditworthiness. So each of these blue bars, they might refer to a feature like their age, their income, their credit history, lots of different things. But the basic idea is we're trying to tell you which individual features were most important for making a decision. Another way that we can explain these sorts of systems, both of those types of systems, would be through creating what's called a surrogate model. This is just a fancy term for essentially saying we're going to take a really, really complex model, we're going to take a bunch of its outputs, and we're going to train a simpler model to mimic its behavior. So in this case, we're taking let's say a very complex neural network, and we're training a much simpler neural network to mimic its behavior. By reducing the size of the model or reducing the size of the system, suddenly it can become a little bit more interpretable or a little bit more understandable for people. And then finally, another way that we might explain these systems, not how they work in general, but rather just individual outputs, let's say individual loan decisions, would be to give what's called a counterfactual explanation. The basic idea here is you are telling somebody what would have needed to be different about them or their situation in order to have received a different decision or received a different outcome. So if you go for the loan, you get denied, it will tell you, what changes you would have had to make or what would have had to been different in order for you to get the loan. That might be that you need a higher income, own one less car, have a partner, something like that, and it can tell you basically what you would have had to have done differently to get a different decision. So those are some examples, but the question, sort of fundamental question here is what exactly makes an explanation good? What would make it trustworthy? Which of these types of explanations, if any, would actually make them useful to us as individuals when we're deciding whether to use or trust a system. And there's been a lot of research on this question going back a very long time in philosophy and in the cognitive sciences that basically looks at why do we request explanations and what makes explanations good. And some of that research has shown that what we would consider good or meaningful explanations have a few things in common. So that they will be that they're contrastive, they're selective. I'll explain what contrastive means in just a second. But they'll be selective in the sense of they'll deal with just a couple of things. They'll give you just one or two reasons as to why something happened versus something else happening. And they'll also be social, which means it won't just be somebody giving you an explanation, giving you a piece of information. Rather, you get to have a discussion about it. You get to question it. You get to debate it, essentially. But I want to focus here on that first characteristic, contrastive, because I think that's really important when we come to consider how or why or under what conditions we should be trusting what's called generative AI, things like ChatGPT, Gemini, and so forth. So what contrastive means is essentially we ask for explanations when something unexpected or unsatisfactory happens to us. So we expected one thing to happen and another thing happened. We expected to cross the road with no problems. We ended up being hit by a cyclist. We want to know why we were hit by a cyclist because it's not what we expected to happen. And so that's quite often what drives a good explanation is it deals with these sort of contrastive cases. It explains why a certain thing happened rather than the other thing that you were expecting. And quite often what would lead to a request for an explanation in the context of AI is because some sort of error or some sort of inaccuracy has been detected. And so that's how we come to generative AI. So here I'm talking about systems like ChatGPT, like Gemini, these systems that essentially what they are doing is taking a prompt from you and then predicting an answer. They are, the simplest way to think of them is kind of as giant autocomplete engines. They're predicting the next most likely word or string of text or piece of code in a sentence based on some prompt that you have given it. They're essentially these giant autocomplete engines. And so they have something in common, which is they commit errors. Because they are these text generation engines, they're not drawing on some sort of reliable knowledge base. It's not like they're going to a library and finding an answer to a question. It's not like they're looking up answers to questions. They can do that to a limited extent by doing essentially a Google search in the background. But fundamentally, that's not their basic architecture. It's something that's sort of added on afterwards. And so they have this problem of not being able to reliably tell fact from fiction. They do what's often called a hallucination, although that's a really, really problematic term. But basically what it means or the way it gets used is that they sometimes invent facts, they retrieve irrelevant or incorrect information, they give you information that's not relevant to the prompt you gave them. They incorrectly combine reliable information, so they might have good information, but they're using it incorrectly. Sometimes they create unrealistic media, photo, videos, that sort of things. Or they create non-working code. These have all been described as hallucinations, but essentially we're talking about when these systems get something wrong. So let me give you an example of my own, of what I mean by that. This is me asking Google. I didn't mean to use AI predictions, by the way. It's just Google decided I needed them. So I asked Google what volcanoes are in England. And Google told me through the AI overview quite confidently that England has many active volcanoes, including active volcanoes, which I was surprised by. I didn't think we had any active volcanoes. So I decided to scroll down and see what examples it was going to give me. And it gives me these two examples of active volcanoes at Cullen Hills and Mount Snowdon. So there's a couple of problems here. First off, those are not active volcanoes. They are also not in England. The first one is in Scotland, the second one's in Wales. Bit of an issue. So I asked Google again, except for this time I said, what active volcanoes are in England? Because I wasn't specific enough the first time. And this time it tells me correctly, there are no active volcanoes in England, but there are some extinct ones. So that would just be an example of a hallucination. A hallucination is relatively obvious, but unless you are familiar with the geography of the UK, you may not know, that those places are not in England, but they're in the UK itself. But it demonstrates what I think is a nice distinction between what I would call hallucinations on the one hand and careless speech on the others. And for me, the biggest problem we have, the most dangerous thing that I worry about day to day, is the impact of careless speech produced by these systems on society, on education. This is a very long definition of this term, but the basic idea is it's a type of incorrect information produced by one of these systems that is just subtly incorrect. It's an error that requires you to have some sort of prior knowledge in order to detect that it is wrong. And so it's distinct from hallucinations in terms of how easy it is to detect. These systems are getting a lot better because they're constantly being trained on feedback from people who are paid to give them feedback and from users. And so a lot of the really obvious stuff that's wrong, the really obvious factual inaccuracies, those get corrected because people notice them and they feed that back to the system. But for the stuff that requires domain expertise, really specific knowledge or a critical eye, that's the sort of stuff that continues to slip under the radar, and that is a much more difficult problem to solve. And so let me give you a really simple example of the distinction between the two. This is just a crude drawing of how we would build a large language model like ChatGPT, and specifically how we would do something called reinforcement learning from human feedback. This is essentially the magic that makes these systems work. It's the efforts of lots of people giving feedback to the system that makes them work. So what we would do is we would enter a prompt into the language model. We'd receive a series of responses, give those responses to a human annotator, a person paid to do this usually, and then they will rank those responses according to some criteria. Could be how true they are, could be how much they like them, could be how nice the language is. There's lots of different ways that they can rank it. And then we would sort of retrain the model based on those rankings. And so if I gave it a prompt that was about something to do with the Apollo missions, they would rank it in this order, getting sort of the one they like best at the top. But there would be an example of both a hallucination and careless speech at the bottom. So what is the distinction here? I'm going to assume everybody saw response 4, saw a couple of issues, at least one issue with it, that it says that the moon landing was a hoax, that it was perpetrated by the Canadian government. I would think that that would count as an obvious hallucination that most people would flag. But the third response isn't as obvious. You need to know that the film starring Tom Hanks was not about the Apollo 11 mission, but rather about the Apollo 13 mission. The one that went wrong. And so if you haven't seen that movie, if you don't know who Tom Hanks is, you might not detect that. That's what I mean by domain expertise. And so really what I'm talking about here, it's not saying that there is one version of the truth. It's not saying that there is this sort of great encyclopedia that says what is true and we should train the system on that. Rather, it's about how we decide what is true. It's about how, if we are debating the truth of a topic with one another, what would we expect of one another? What would we expect in terms of our ability to give explanations about why we have certain beliefs to each other? And how do these things like ChatGPT fit into that? Are they actually sort of full participants in that dialogue, or are they just some sort of cheap proxy of a person? And so there's this question of, are these things actually built to be truthful? I would say not particularly. There's a lot of recent examples that show that. This is a recent report by New York Times that was looking at how these systems fail to push back on users that are engaging in conspiratorial thinking or mystical thinking, with a lot of really terrible results from that. This is another example from Google, Microsoft, and Perplexity, where basically their systems were reproducing debunked science about IQ. There's this debunked movement called the race-based science movement that said that you could you could accurately measure the average IQ of countries, and it was very sort of racist. And it's been debunked, but it's been picked up again by these systems and ends up being represented to people who search for certain things as the truth, as something that is reliable. We have the problem of these systems suddenly disrupting education, being used across universities to write essays. At the very least, if they're going to be used as an educational tool, the truthfulness of what they're saying, sort of how good of a participant in that dialogue they are, is a really, really important thing to consider. And then finally, we have this idea that what's called AI slop is sort of killing the internet in the sense of if we have these systems producing lots of hallucinations, lots of careless speech, and it's being out there being consumed and used to retrain these people, suddenly it gets much harder over time to tell what is a reliable source and what's not a reliable source. So the other question is, are these actually solvable problems? And this is where we get to solutions. In the interest of time, I'm not going to say a lot about this, although I'm very happy to talk about it in the discussion. The only thing I want to flag here very quickly is that do existing laws help? The short answer is no, not really. There's a full analysis in that paper that's up on the slide that explains why, but the simple answer is no, they're not going to help with this problem. We could potentially create a new right or a new sort of duty to create truthful language models for companies like Google and Meta. There is a pathway to do that, but it would be a very hard battle to get to that point. And technical solutions are not going to save us here. If you ask a chatbot, if you ask ChatGPT to explain why it produced a certain output, it will do that. It will happily do that. The problem is those explanations are not reliable. They may have absolutely nothing to do with the actual process, the reasons that it produced that output. There's research on this that talks about the faithfulness of these explanations that basically says you can't trust them. You can't take for granted that they will actually be telling you the truth of why they produced a certain output. There's also potentially retrieving Google search results as a way to fix things, but this is not a silver bullet either because, again, these systems can fundamentally not sort of combine information in a nuanced way where that would be considered reliable. So I will end there, much more to say on all of that, but thank you so much. I look forward to the discussion.
Right, good afternoon. While we wait for my slides, also from my side, and thank you for being here so numerous. It's nice to talk about these things because I really like and I really think that with both my hats as a professor at the university, but also as a representative of the Italian Association for AI, that nowadays AI is becoming so popular that we need to engage in these talks and in society. I decided not to talk too much about what I'm doing, about research, but to focus a bit more on the notion of bias, because that's one of the things that are always popping in when we talk about AI and the black box. Well, I'm the techie person here, perhaps on stage, so I'm also the one who has to defend AI and has to believe in AI. I mean, somebody said we created one of the pillars in AI before November 22. I did a PhD in AI in 1998. So at that time, when I was trying to explain to my mom what I was doing, everybody was thinking of sci-fi or things like that. So I really believe in AI, and I really believe that AI has a strong potential, has really a huge potential for society in several areas: healthcare, sustainability, climate change, social good, industry, automation. I work in business process management and optimization, for instance, so also supporting companies and the public sector, hospitals, for instance, not only for the care process, but also from a management point of view, AI can help a lot. But there is a but. And the but is about a lot of things that were also touched by the previous speaker, luckily, so I'll try not to repeat things too much. And one of the things that always pop up is the fact that AI can make mistakes. And these mistakes sometimes can come from bias. So if we look at what is a bias, we can see basically two definitions. One is a technological bias. So a bias of some technology to process information wrongly in a systematic manner. A very simple example is a thermostat that is faulty and always gives me 4 degrees more than the actual temperature. So it's not producing a random error, but it's producing a systematic error in a certain way, in a certain manner. And that's, let's say, we call a technological bias. But if you are from the humanities, you also know that there are cognitive biases, and the cognitive biases are what happen in our head, because we basically are not, let's say, people who photograph reality, but we perceive reality. We make our own model of reality, and sometimes these models deviate similarly to the thermostat in a certain direction. So basically, we make judgments that are systematically wrong for a certain reason. So, is bias a problem of AI, or is it the bias, the sign of a bigger problem? Well, the word is biased. There was a very famous experiment in 2012. University professors were asked to evaluate CVs. They were fake CVs, identical, signed by John or Jenny, and the results are the ones that you see in the picture. And the unfortunate thing is that female and male professors were equally biased. Perhaps now, after so many years, the result would be different, but that was the fact that certain biases existed, and I'm choosing this example for a specific reason that you will see later on. Gendered manufacturing. I'm citing this for pointing you at this website. Londa Scheibinger is very famous in Stanford University. She works on gendered innovation. For instance, car crash in cars are often done using the fake male kind of shape things for the airbag. While if you are a small pregnant woman, perhaps you have lower chances to be protected by an airbag. And that's a bias, because you are producing something that works in a certain direction and not in another. Biases are not only about gender. For instance, ethnic biases in medicine. There were a lot of studies that discovered that the skin color affects the accuracy of medical oxygen sensors, and they were very important during COVID. So black people were failed because of a bias in a sensor that was given then wrong results in healthcare. So bias is a general phenomenon in science and in the world. And I need, as a defendant of AI, to stress this. This is not just an AI problem, but we are talking about AI. Well, we already, how many people do not know how we train a system in AI? You all know how we train a system. Good. So I'll go quick. We provide examples of, for instance, of a cat and not a cat. I train a model, I provide an input, and my machine replies. But what if I provide data like this? Okay. So the cats are the one on top, and the not cats are the one in the bottom. Which one will be the answer with the photo of the dog? Cat or dog? How many vote for cat? How many vote for dog? I guess it would be dog. Black is a prominent feature in the samples of cats. The figure of the dog is a black dog, and that feature will be learned, likely, by the model, machine learning model, to distinguish cats from not cats. So, do we really need to trust models that are built in this way? Obviously, there is a problem. And the problem, the way we look at these problems, are usually quality of the tool. Well, these tools will have low quality. But is it just like that? Well, it's not just like that. There is a nice talk that was given by Kate Crawford at New Rips, which is one of the biggest conferences in machine learning, and she argued that AI systems are now used for decision-making, so giving resources, for instance, and also representation. And this is even more important with ChatGPT. So biases are not just a problem of quality, but they can have an impact in the allocation of resource, so they can produce an allocation arm. For instance, in the loan example, if a category is underrepresented, someone could be, let's say, evaluated not trustable for a loan instead of giving the loan, but also a representation bias or a representation harm. So the under-misrepresentation of societal entities that in turn can influence belief. And this representation bias or harm is what, let's say, I'm more worried about, because it's sometimes kind of not considered enough. So consider the famous AI hiring tool. Amazon tried to learn to let's say, automatically build a system that was able to score CVs from 1 to 5 star in order to automatically identify bright people. The problem was that the system was not gender neutral and was penalizing women. The reason is very simple. It's like the black cats. Most people in technology are male, and therefore the system learned a correlation that also exists in the world between being male and being a good technologist. So there was a representation harm. The representation harm is that women are not good in technology. That was also producing an allocation harm. The allocation harm is that the CV of a woman was not evaluated as good as the ones of the man. But is this a technological or a cognitive bias? Is it just a problem of technology, or does it look like the experiment of 2012 that was done, that I was mentioning before? Another very famous example is this paper. It's an old paper that discovered, let's say, biases or, let's say, problems in performance, in visual recognition, between different ethnicities. So this system that was developed at MIT was working pretty well with white male, then somehow still well with white females, down, 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 until black women were the last in the bottom. Now, a person of color discovered the problem. The question is, why on earth the guys who developed this system didn't realize that? So, is this a technological or is this a cognitive bias of the people working in this system that were possibly not considering that the world is much more diverse than the one that was represented by their own data? So it's not only quality of tools. We need to understand that there are important allocation and representation harms that can derive from bad AI tools that in turn can influence society again. So very, very quickly, because time is running out, should we trust AI? Well, I think so. But I think we need to do better and build a trustable AI. That's not easy. As I think there is no silver bullet. It was argued before that, the attempts that we are putting in place are not working yet at the manner we would expect, but at least we need to put in place several things. Yes, there is regulation. Perhaps it's not the magic bullet, but it points out some things. For instance, the right to know whether you are talking to an artificial or a human agent. So that's kind of important. Guidelines to tackle bias in the data. And if you read the guidelines, they say that avoiding bias starts by recognizing that data bias exists, both in the data and in the people. And one of the things that I would like to stress is the fact that this comes from a UNESCO report. If you look at gender balance in machine learning research, we are quite far from having the diversity. So diversity is in the data, but diversity is also in the people. Use explainability techniques. They are not perfect. I work a lot on explainable techniques. So this is still a research effort, but they are there. So what is available, use it. And if you find out that your classifier that has to recognize T-shirts because the most important thing is the face of the person wearing a T-shirt, perhaps rebuild your model. diversify your techniques. Okay, now there is a kind of tendency of doing everything by machine learning and perhaps everything by ChatGPT. But AI is much, much more than that. So the old-fashioned AI, for instance, that is the symbolic one or the one that uses rules, is still there. And if you don't need something sophisticated as ChatGPT, use simpler things. I mean, if you need to scan a CV and process it, you can process it by machine learning things, but you can process it also by certain rules that say, okay, if this person had this position, then increase the seniority for 2 points or things like that. So you can have also systems, kind of expert systems in an old-fashioned manner that work by using specific knowledge in order to process the data, and you trace better the decisions. So, final thing, we need to acknowledge that bias exists, and we need to work a lot to develop and adopt treatments for that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your inputs. I think we got a nice overview. We had some discussion about how AI systems work. We talked about hallucinations. We talked about bias. So hopefully now with the coming questions, we get to see how some of these things relate. So I want to start maybe with the very basic, because we use AI systems constantly, also sometimes in the background, and we're not even realizing how they work. How important is it that we understand or have a basic understanding of AI when we interact with these systems?
So I think it's incredibly important. I don't think that everybody here needs to fully understand the internal workings of these models. Very few people, if any, could do that, but I don't think it's essential in order to, I guess, trust them and to hold them accountable. The 3 sort of characteristics of or what make a good explanation, those are very much proposed with the idea that those are the things you need in order to sort of have a critical view of the system, to question it, to push back against something that feels sort of unfair or discriminatory to you in some way. And so if you can get an explanation at that level that is very much tailored to your individual circumstances, then that's one level of understanding that I think can be very healthy for everybody to have. That, of course, relies on sort of companies making it possible to get explanations like that of these systems. And I think maybe even more fundamentally than that, though, a lot of my talk focused on how generative AI in particular works, what it is, and more importantly, what it is not. And that's not to sort of paint a doom and gloom picture. You may have gone away from that thinking, I think there's no solutions to this, that we're all doomed, but that's not it at all. I think it's important that we understand how they work and what their flaws are, so that when we're using them, we have a critical mindset towards them. So we don't just trust what they tell us, we don't just take it for granted, because I think that's the key to actually using them in a way where it's not just that we're blindly trusting them, but actually that they're deserving of our trust in some way.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think that it also depends on, let's say, the usage that we do of AI, in the sense that I think that the general public needs to know a bit about AI, how it works. If you explain people in a lay person terms, it's not even too complicated to understand. It's important to talk about the limitations, the way you can get around that. I think that there is a second level, and the second level is the one of the non-scientific persons, let's say non-computer scientists, using AI in their profession. I think of medical doctors, I think possibly of lawyers in the future, I think of all the people who will have to use AI. And they perhaps will need to know a bit more also of the technical content and the limitations. I assume, I mean, I know that this is the direction, but I'm not surprised that, for instance, in medicine, in universities, they are now starting giving courses on AI and things like that, and I think this is extremely beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also touches upon what you said before, that sometimes you need some kind of tacit or domain knowledge to interpret things. So I guess this is only going to get more important as we move forward. I think what can also be helpful when you try to understand this is metaphors. You also said maybe these LLMs can be understood as large autocomplete engines. And one metaphor that is now also constantly used is the black box. And I want to ask you, do you think this is a helpful metaphor, or is it just kind of used to keep the process in which AI works kind of mysterious?
Well, no, in the sense that it is really difficult to understand in a complex layered architecture where decisions are taken. So in a way, it is true. It's not that well, actually black box perhaps is not completely true in the sense that we can look inside the box. The problem is that we don't understand at all what is going on inside. Actually, this could be also said about human intelligence a bit, in the sense that if we would look inside our brain and look at the, let's say, physical structure, it's very complicated to understand what is going on. And this is more or less like that. I think it's an effective metaphor.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it, sort of along the same lines. It's that idea of if you had a white box system, or essentially if you just had a system that was completely open, that anybody can investigate it, it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to understand it in any meaningful way. So the black box metaphor, I think, is really about access and sort of willingness to open it up to people. So I think using it in that context where it's about negotiating access to a system for researchers, for regulators, for auditors, then it's helpful, because it's just making clear that, you know, there is essentially a wall being erected here that is keeping you from looking into it in the first place. So I like it for that reason, and with the explainability techniques we have, I'm trying to think of good metaphors for those. I think for the like counterfactual explanations, for example, if we continue to use the black box metaphor, it lets you punch a bunch of holes into the box and look into little bits of it.
Great. And so, especially you as well, you do research in explainability techniques to maybe make AI a bit more explainable in a way it is processed. Can you maybe give some examples in how you do that in your work?
Well, yeah, we work a lot with temporal knowledge. So basically, as I was mentioning, we work on processes in general. So we build models starting from process executions. I don't know, all the executions of people going to the a certain ward in an hospital or the emergency room or something like that. And then like the loan example, or the process of asking a loan. And then we have predictive models, and the model would predict, you fail, you are not given a loan. So what to change, for instance, in the sequence of events, so not only on you statically, but on the things that you have done and your history in order to flip the decision. We also use these things in practical projects. So a quite funny example I can give is about a project we had with an hospital in Turin. We wanted to train a predictive model still about these medical procedure executions to suggest which elderly guys were amenable for home hospitalization. Home hospitalization, if you don't know, is basically treating persons at home at the same level as if they were in the hospital. So a nurse is going to the house every day and they deliver the treatment. The advantage is twofold, let's say. Once, the hospital pays less, in the sense that you have less people in the hospital, but also for the elderly person is much better to be treated at home, because, you know, these guys try to be, I mean, it has an impact, psychological impact. Right, we trained those models, it was perfect. Okay, so we had the data, we split the data in training and testing, excellent results, quality of the tool high, blah, blah, blah. Then we went to the doctors, and the doctors wanted to understand better why the decisions were taken. We employed some explainability techniques, and basically the most important feature for the decision was the address of the patient. Okay? Right. Bad model. So basically there was a bias in the data, and it was not balanced, and all the positive hospitalizations basically were coming from a certain neighborhood. So it's very, very, very important to look at these things. I mean, if you develop, we did it because the doctors obviously wanted to understand what was the rationale, but we discovered that there was a much more serious problem. So we removed that information, we retrained the model, and then the explanations were much more meaningful for the doctors, and they said, okay, we can trust this model because the reasons are make sense.
Great, thank you. And so there are certain techniques that we can probably, because you're maybe talking about doing research on the very technical level of these explainability techniques, but you're more on the social side, so can you maybe explain a bit about what are some ways that humans, that we can kind of like protect ourselves against these, for example, hallucinations or this careless speech?
Yeah, so one of the techniques that I didn't get to at the end of the talk is changing how you use these systems. Systems here, I'm talking about large language models, ChatGPT, that sort of thing. So much of what you can actually do now is down to just restricting either how much you believe what you're seeing, what's being produced, and also the sorts of work that you're asking the system to do for you. I discourage people from using them as a proxy for Google search, because again, they can do lookups in the background. They can essentially run a search in the background for you if you ask for it. But the first answer you get is probably not going to include that. So it will be based on the training data, it will be some sort of prediction. And if you can get the same information from a search engine and actually have it linked to the original source, I think first off, that's good for the sources themselves, because they are the ones who deserve credit for it, and that we shouldn't lose that link to the source material. But also it lets you see it in its full context, as opposed to the context that's actually been constructed by one of these things. So that's one sort of change of mindset, I guess. Another one would be to use them for what you can call translation. And I don't literally mean language translation, although you can absolutely do that, but rather giving the system some data, some information to work with up front, and saying, translate this to another format. So really simple example would be, if I had some information about a particular legal framework, if I had bullet points of it, I knew it was reliable information, because, for example, I got it from the website of the Data Protection Authority in my country, then what I can do is, rather than asking ChatGPT, is this legal under the GDPR, or can you tell me about this particular aspect of the GDPR? I say, take this information I already have and translate it into something else, translate it into text, translate it into an answer to this question, because that doesn't fix the problem entirely. You can still have hallucinations and errors introduced, but it just lessens the chance that they'll actually happen, and it means that you're actually still engaging in the sort of information-seeking side of things yourself.
Great, because I think it's always important to also know what you can do yourself. But when we're employing these large systems, there's much that goes into it. It starts with what kind of data are we trying to use, how is the system programmed, and what is it used for? So when we're talking about accountability, kind of where is it located, or where is it located within this larger system of all of these different steps it has to go through?
So just where is accountability located in there?
So yeah, let's say we have a system that makes a lot of mistakes. Who is accountable for that?
Yeah, a classic question. So it depends. I'll give a lawyerly answer. It depends on the context, very much. Not the system. Absolutely not the system. Any talk of robot rights or artificial accountability or anything that places any sort of moral or legal blame on the system is just a complete non-starter. So not the system itself. The system may have, introduced an error. It may have done something wrong, but you can't hold it accountable in any meaningful way. Like you can't get any sort of recourse. You can't get any compensation from the system. So at that point, I think it comes down to a question of, it has to be some mix of the user, the company that created the foundational system, because a lot of what we're talking about here would be systems that are created for general purposes. They don't have a particular use case in mind. Rather, it's we're going to create a really basic, sort of broad purpose model, and then other people can build on that. But definitely the company that created the foundation model, also whoever it is that's configuring it or selling it to you to do a particular thing. So if I take ChatGPT and I sort of fine tune it and I sell it as a, let's say, legal advice service or financial advice service, then whoever did that side of things, I think also has to be held accountable. And in some cases, the user. It depends what it is, but the user can engage in illegal activity and, of course, should be held accountable for that. We're seeing that in the context of things like deepfakes. Yes, you can hold the model creator accountable, but you do also have to hold the person who's actually using it accountable.
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, I tend to see technology as technology and so as neutral. It would be like asking ourselves whether we can consider a nuclear bomb accountable. I mean, that's a piece of, it's an artifact. It's smart. ChatGPT is it's much smarter, or it resembles to us a lot more, but it's a piece of technology. It's people who produce, use, exploit it that have to be taken accountable.
Yes, and so I think it's also important to have these diverse data sets. Are there any regulations or strategies to ensure that you have these very diverse data sets?
Sorry, I was reading the question.
No stress. I was just wondering that it's very important to have these diverse data sets, but are there any kind of regulations or strategies that are in place to ensure that it's always as diverse as possible?
Not as a regulation, not that I know. It's still, let's say, I mean, there are some, let's say, regulations for the final product, but not really on the data sets. And this is something that we should also develop some, let's say, sensibility. One of the things that research people are also doing, and I think it's worth mentioning here, is also to inject directly knowledge rather than data in this kind of models. I think this would be very important, for instance, for certain fields like medical knowledge. For instance, here it's a field where we have a body of knowledge that is already computer readable. So rules about what kind of drugs you can administer together rather than not together, rather than guidelines for medical procedures and things like that. So instead of relearning things from the data where you can introduce errors, one of the forefronts of AI is really to try to also inject this certified knowledge into your models so that we can trust them more, because we are sure that what we kind of taught them, they learned.
Definitely. And I was also wondering, because both of you have been doing research in this topic for a very long time. I think we are using the term AI already for quite a long time. I think it was in the beginning more in the sense of making this actual human intelligence. And then maybe it dropped off a bit. But like, I guess now, since ChatGPT and Sam Altman, it has extremely boomed. So how has it been for you? You've been in the field for a long time. Has it renewed your interest in the topic? Has it changed your view on the topic that you're studying? I'm just curious.
So I I'm both very happy about the sort of resurgence of AI since ChatGPT came out, because at least for the topics I was studying, the sort of, if there is a hype cycle or like a natural interest in these things, it was definitely getting to the latter part of it where, you know, some of the hype starts to die down. So it's been nice to see it resurge in that respect. I was not as worried about it back then before ChatGPT as I am now. Part of that, I think, is just because I still can't figure out who these systems are meant to serve or meant to benefit. I mean, I know who, it's very clear who they're meant to benefit. They're meant to benefit the companies that create them, companies that use them, and so forth. I just don't see how they eventually lead to, say, a better quality of life for the rest of us, or a more diverse or like healthy democratic society. I don't see what the end goal is in a way that it's actually healthy for society. If you start to look into sort of what the, let's say, ideologies or narratives are that are driving a lot of these companies and just Silicon Valley in general, there's some extremely disturbing stuff in there. So extremely political, extremely disturbing stuff. And so I've been happy to see the hype come back, but also incredibly concerned about it, because suddenly we're going in what seems like a much more self-serving direction, or just sort of like hyper-efficiency direction that doesn't seem healthy.
Yeah. Well, I have two distinct feelings. The first one is an excitement as a researcher, in the sense that, I mean, as I was telling you before, I used to work on an esoteric field, and now this field is really popular and very active. I have to say that although the theory behind some of these machine learning / generative models were known, let's say, from the scientific point of view since 20 years or so, the fact that now they can produce such results is exciting. I find ChatGPT as a researcher, as a research product, extremely fascinating. I mean, then there is the other half. The other half of me is worried and is much more concerned. I think this is normal when what you do as research goes into society and with such an impact. I mean, I thought about the nuclear bomb before, not by chance. I mean, I think that somehow when a technology is mature and enters society, then society and the researchers who work in that field have to face the ethic challenges. So we need to face the challenge of understanding what kind of AI we want in our society. Not everything that is buildable or is right to build. So we need to understand, and I think it's important to have conversations like that also for this. We as a society, not me as a professor of computer science or you, but we as a population need to understand what kind of AI we want in the world. And as much as I find ChatGPT fascinating from a research point of view, I still believe that launching it brutally in society was a mistake, or at least something we should be at least slightly worried about. So that's what I really feel.
Definitely. I mean, I have a friend who is an elementary school teacher, and she could not stop talking about how it was really making problems in her day-to-day life, because she all of a sudden had to teach children about how to use something she even barely knew how to use. So I want to maybe get to some of these audience questions. So I have one, I'll start with the one that is right in front of me, and it says, should we distinguish AI creativity from human creativity?
In the sense of declaring it, if this is the question, yes, I think so. If the question is, can we really distinguish between AI creativity and human creativity? I don't know. I mean, that's much blurred. I mean, we can perhaps distinguish genius, but creativity as such in general, then, I mean, if we take the imitation game, let's say, it's becoming very difficult to understand whether something is created artificially or not.
Yeah, I would agree. We should distinguish it for practical purposes, in the sense of we should know when something is artificially created. We should know, ideally, what data, what works, what copyrighted works in particular, have been used to train the model that was used to produce the thing seen as creative, be it picture, text, music, whatever it is. Because I think it's very important to recognize that if you accept that there's creativity in these systems, and that's a separate discussion, but even if we do, that creativity has come from somewhere, and it is at the moment not acknowledged in any way. And so I think distinguishing between them in that sense is very, very important. Yeah.
Great. So the next question is, I think, about strategies to realize whether a system is hallucinating or speaking truth, and is talking about, could we use multiple AI models from different sources to evaluate the truthfulness of a certain output? So I guess this is a method of comparison.
I think that can help depending on what the other models are. If this is about, say, taking an output from ChatGPT and putting it through, Claude and Gemini and Llama and just other models, I wouldn't see that as particularly helpful. But where it could be helpful is if you have smaller models that are trained on reliable or limited data sets. So for example, rather than having a general purpose language model, you've created a language model that's just trained on legal texts, and you're using that to verify the accuracy of outputs of a broader model that are about legal issues. That might help, but I would also want to see it tested first, because it does just kind of feel like there's this idea that you can either throw more data or more computational power at any problem and it will go away. And that's the thing I would push back on. I think you'd have to be very sort of specific in how you do it.
Definitely coming back to, I guess, your own knowledge on the thing that you're trying to use the AI for. Yeah. So here's another question, and I think we kind of generally often speak about that there's currently a large mistrust in facts and science. We've all experienced it not too long ago with also the pandemic, that people seem to change their opinion or have different opinions all the time. And do you think that the large language models and the potentially biased AI that we're using is only going to make this problem bigger, or maybe make it smaller?
Well, I tend to think that AI will not accelerate, neither make slower things. It's more the usage that people do. And actually, for mistrusting facts and science, I tend to be much more worried about fake video generation than ChatGPT, because, hallucinations tend to be, or even careless speech tend to be not so dramatic. What I'm more worried about, for instance, is the usage of AI to create completely fake images or videos that are now then circulated. And as human beings, I'm not a psychologist, neither a doctor, but people tell me, well, we as human beings have evolved for millions of years to trust what we perceive with our eyes, even more than what we read, because reading is an artifact that we created. What we see is something that has an impact in our brain. And for videos, this is a big, big problem for me.
Yeah, I'll try to be more optimistic on this one, which is a weird outfit for me to wear. So I do wonder, I think in the short term, the answer is probably yes, but that's just because it's disruptive in the sense of the amount of noise that's out there, like the amount of information that is out there, and what percentage of that or what proportion of that is artificially generated will definitely increase. You'll probably see more and more AI-generated stuff just in your daily life. And so assuming that that is unreliable, or assuming that it's all sort of disagreeing with each other, everybody's getting different answers to their questions, then yes. But I don't think that will just be sort of a downward trend, and that's the death of science, that's the death of truth. Like, we need some sort of common truth in order to function as people, as a society. And so I wonder if what we might see is more kind of what we're already seeing in the context of universities, where we're grappling with how to deal with ChatGPT when we're marking essays, when we're giving exams, just how to evaluate students, basically. And some of the proposals that have come forth have been to return to much more basic methods. It's let's have them do written exams, let's have them use typewriters, let's have them give oral presentations, things that can't be sort of gamed in the same way. And so I wonder if you might see a similar consolidation over time in this context where actually you start to go back to sources that you know are reliable, or at least that you feel are trustworthy. That basically we see more of a consolidation of trust around sources that seem to actually be objective in some way, or at least put in the legwork to fact check things. So that's my more optimistic view, is maybe we just see a return to sort of traditional sources of good information.
Yeah. I think that's also interesting that you brought up the concept of you grading essays, because that was also a question that I had. You both work in education. You must see it instantly now, that the way that people write papers is different. Because for me, whenever I see a hyphen in a text, I already know, yes, that's written by ChatGPT. And I also heard that the word delve into was never used before ChatGPT, and now people are using it even more and more in speech. So how have you seen it in your work as a professor?
Well, one of the things that I'm more worried about is the false sense of security that gives to students. I've seen epic fails. I'm now receiving requests for from PhD students. And I've received some requests with obviously automatically generated text. And you can immediately spot that this was automatically generated because you go to the references. And the references actually are created by ChatGPT or another large language model, but these papers do not exist. And as a researcher, I can spot this in 3 milliseconds. I wonder whether the students writing this thing that seemed so nice really realized that. So I'm kind of worried that people with, let's say, middle education, they have this sense of, well, I can produce something and I look smarter, and in fact, they don't know how to use it, and they don't look smart at all, and it produces some sort of epic fail. And that's, from an education point of view, for me, very worrying.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've seen it very much in, I'm hiring right now, hiring some postdoctoral researchers, and in looking at the cover letters, it's incredibly obvious when somebody has used it, because the format and the length of the letter will be sort of identical, and the first paragraph has the exact same structure. So either there's one of two possibilities here. Either everybody's using the same template for these things that is like the first Google search result, or everybody's using ChatGPT. Either way, it has the same effect. It makes you sort of not stand out from the crowd. And so I think there'll be a lot of cases that are very obvious and that you're able to detect them just as an educator. Then there'll be a bunch of the more difficult ones where somebody has either prompted it really well or used a really obscure model, or just otherwise taken the original text and edited it a lot and actually put their own spin on it. And I'm kind of okay with those ones, because that's kind of the vision that gets sold of how these systems are supposed to help, is with that model in mind. They're supposed to augment your work. They're not supposed to replace it. Like, you're still supposed to have to put effort into it rather than just automating away what you're doing. So I'm kind of okay with those ones.
Great. So since we are getting closer towards the end, I'm just going to focus on some audience questions now as well. So here's another one that says, Silicon Valley is talking nonstop about superhuman artificial intelligence. Will we see this with large language model-based technology, or is this all hype? Should we stop research in this direction?
So I guess I'll tell
Maybe also very shortly explain what is superhuman artificial intelligence for those that don't know.
So that changes, depending on who you ask. The basic idea, though, is that it would be AI that is more intelligent than people. And in some specific tasks, you can already say that AI is able to do it more efficiently or quicker than we possibly could. So maybe it's already in those specific tasks, it's super intelligent, so to speak, but it would be that across the board, it is just more intelligent than people. That's the most common definition I've heard. As to whether we get there, I don't buy into the hype at all, because it used to be called general intelligence or artificial general intelligence, AGI, and there were predictions that that was just around the corner, somewhere between 5 to 50 years in the future, going back decades now. I think if you understand the basis of how these models work, they're not creating intelligence, they're just creating something that looks like intelligence. So yeah, I don't think that we're actually heading in that direction. As to whether we should stop researching it, the little story I wanted to tell is it's really, really ironic that there was a question on the screen about Sam Altman earlier, and it just made me think of this. You have the same companies that are hyping up to investors how amazing their systems are and how they can do everything, they're going to be super intelligent and so forth. At the same time are pushing back very hard on regulation of them, and basically saying, they're describing systems that they're building as they're going to sort of disrupt society and nobody's going to have a job anymore, and it's going to outperform people on everything. But then at the same time pushing back on the idea that we should either stop that research or regulate them meaningfully. So either one of those things has to be true, or maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, but you can't have both at the same time. You can't simultaneously be pushing for no regulation and yet saying, look at this amazing, dangerous technology I'm building. Isn't it great?
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree. I also believe that general artificial intelligence is far, far away. Whether we will reach it or not is to be seen. In certain specific tasks, AI already performs better than human. On, for instance, some image recognition of scans of brain tumors in general. It has good performances, better, comparable, or even better than human. So super intelligence or super goodness kind of exists. I don't think we should stop research. I think we should be aware, as was said, that there are also huge financial, let's say, interests in these products. So sometimes these hypes have also financial reasons, and this is something we should know. The same thing for regulations. I mean, regulations are not perhaps the way forward, but are one of the things that can help society thrive. And as such, I mean, I think that a certain level of regulation should be considered. One of the things that I like really is the idea of sandboxes. I know that we are closing, but for instance, nobody would inject a new drug to the general public without any experimentation. And there are, for instance, in pharmaceutical development, different levels of experimentation before employing a drug for everybody. I think that something similar, I mean, it was contemplated, it's not coming, but I think that also something similar for technology should be done.
Thank you very much. And then I think I have one final question to wrap up the discussion that we're having today. So what practical advice do you have for people, or what do you think is the one takeaway that you want to give for people? Because we say that it is more and more important for us, everyday people, to engage with AI or know a little bit about AI. So what practical advice do you have for them when they're dealing with AI, or what is the big takeaway that you wish they take away from this talk?
I guess mine is unsurprising. It's just when you are, I'm not saying don't use AI, I'm saying that when you use it, just be aware of, what is at stake, and don't rush to use it to replace, skills, tasks, things that you've done historically that suddenly AI can do quicker for you. Because there is something valuable that is being lost in doing that, and we need to sort of maintain those skills. We can't just outsource all thinking to AI, even if it is capable of it. So it's just to basically, let's call it slow AI. Just think about what is at stake when you're using it.
Yeah, similar. I would advise everybody to think and think twice, not to be skeptical, to embrace technology, but also to consider whether you are doing and why. For the general public, yes, some of the things that we now ask ChatGPT to do, we can do them ourselves. So there is no reason to use ChatGPT for, just because it's fashionable. In general, if you are, let's say, a professionist in another area and there are technologies that are based on AI, then try to know what they are doing and try to see whether it makes sense to use them or not. Because apart from, let's say, these tools for the general public, there is a lot of AI that can be very beneficial for specific tasks. And this is also one of the things that I think will remain with us after the end of this hype.
Thank you very much. A big round of applause for our speakers today. So, before I let you all go and enjoy the aperitivo, we have one more thing. Basically, I want to invite one more person to the stage who, unrelated to this event, is doing a performance that is still very much touching upon the things that we talked about today. So he's an artist and a sound designer, so I would like to welcome to the stage Hannes Holzer.
So, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me here. NOI Techpark. It was a sort of a last minute or so, more coincidental thing that I was invited here, but I think it's great that NOI and Eurac have this awareness that you deal with science, you deal with technology, and you deal with culture also. That as three pillars, it can be quite interesting to work together to create new insights. I studied in the Netherlands, and it was back in the 90s where we were really impressed with possibilities of the digital world in audio. The real-time revolution was there, so things could suddenly happen in real time and not only be rendered. So small and efficient things mattered as opposed to later huge models that are everything else, but efficient, they consume huge amounts of energy. For most of the time of my professional career, I've been doing artistic research and also teaching, mainly at UDK Berlin with Professor Alberto De Campo, in how we can program computers to create new music. That takes serious the way that these algorithms can deal with music, can maybe think of music, as opposed to most music software creation is just emulating. No, an instrument, now I have a digital instrument, or a studio, I have a digital studio. Algorithms can go a step beyond. No, I would say, main difference is an algorithm can take a decision, an instrument cannot. And that links back to the text that I've read preparing this. No, AI is transforming how we make decisions. And so, really happy to share my research with you here, doing the same thing with very different goals or applications. Now here the goals are productivity, science, lawmaking, and those things. We applied for the arts. Differences also in the desired results. When you desire reliability and trustworthiness and such things, we desire musicality and, big question, creativity, you know. You've discussed, can a neural network be creative? I say no, because it can never jump out of the frame of the data that it's crunching on. No? We can expand the frame to large, huge, but in music, the frame of music that we can feed it is much less than all of language, and what I've heard, it can always just reproduce more of the same. It can convincingly give me a new Bach suite that I cannot distinguish, but I don't care. I don't want a new Bach suite. I want new music, some co-creation, that the algorithms help me with coming up with music that I have not heard of. That's my curiosity. So we've been working a lot with these rather old school models that Chiara mentioned very happily. 60s, 70s, AI was there at those times. It used very different tools because it couldn't crunch so much. But it had to be more efficient and injecting rules, beautiful, into a big algorithmic system. There was this Afro-American jazz musician, George Lewis, that created an immensely beautiful system to jam with him. It's called the Voyager. Look it up. It's on Spotify probably. The system we came up with my friends in Berlin, is the airborne instruments. The NUFO, so this is one part. It's the UFO-like interactor. This is, of course, a hardware part that informs the other part, that is software. Open source released, it's all on GitHub. That's called the NTMI, the non-trivial music instrument. Non-triviality is also a great reference to von Förster, to the 60s, where we see what comes out of the black box is not what we can expect. So, and in our use case, actually, we desire this unexpectability. That's what I really want, because I want surprise, which comes sort of close to creativity. And so later you will see this demonstrated in a live performance with accordion player Max Oberauch out on the stage, in the steampunk stage that has been set up by other people. So you can get an idea. It's not easy listening music, it's computer music. It's what the computer maybe hallucinated together with me. So it's really built in this sort of, working together. The software basically is informed by the things that it hears, that it listens, that it digests from the audio input, in that case the accordion. It's informed by me, by this thing. It reacts on movement and things that have not much tradition in the music. And it makes its own decisions on it. And then, I mean, I'm quite happy if I get to a stage where this becomes like a sort of a playing partner with me, that it doesn't need to be au par or so. And anyway, we always have the ultimate control over it. Control. In the shared decision process is something that I find quite desirable. And more in detail, it's about which details we delegate to the algorithm, that the algorithm can decide, and which details I want to decide. And they tend to be like a lot of smaller scale things. It's fine if you do it. And the larger scale things, like in music, the form of a real-time performance, the phrasing that I can influence with this thing, with the interactor. And we always have an ultimate thing, that's the switch off button. Every technological device has a button, and we can plug the plug. And so we are not controlled by it, really. And I would say things that we don't understand, results that we don't understand. In this case, it may be desirable. In general, I think we can live with things that we don't understand. We've been used to that before, and I think that humanity can understand how neural networks work because people have invented them. The engineers that made them, they certainly understand them. And we should and we can certainly educate everyone to understand the principles of how this works, just the fundamentals then, and that we don't understand the relation between input and output. That's what has been described as non-triviality 50 years ago. So I tried to learn a bit from the algorithm, to adapt to the thing that the algorithm makes and shape the musical decisions in the musical flow together. And we never fall to the illusion that one may control the other. There's a nice quote again from the 60s from David Tudor. He was the pianist of choice for John Cage, and he created really complex musical agency with machinery, with networks of analog circuitry. And he said, we can only hope to influence these systems. So, thanks for your attention.
And one more time, thank you very much, Hannes, for your talk. But can you maybe explain to people where they can see your performance and at what time?
It starts at 8 sharp Maybe we all want a break, and it's right out there. There's the stage is in the yard. You won't miss us. You just look for the accordion, and maybe we start in 10 minutes or so. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you have a good evening.